Okay, we're in for the home stretch. This part here basically deals with what the hell's going on right now. Who knows what, who's doing what. The key word is Jerusalem. Jerusalem starts with the letters J-E. In French, J-E means me. Me followed by ruse. Scheme is the meaning of the word ruse. It converts into the word rose, as in Rose Bowl parade. It converts to horses, and it converts to neurosis, all of which are linked in meaning to what is going on as a ruse. You're being fooled is basically what it's saying. And the last part is the word alem. Alem converts to the letters in male, whale. England's royal family goes under the name of whale. The story of Jonah is about Jonah jumping off a boat on the way to Spain in the Mediterranean and being picked up by a whale. George Bush Sr. jumped out of an airplane during World War II, landed in the water, was immediately picked up by a submarine. There are links there that need to be explained in detail, but we don't have time to do that in this particular event or occasion. The word also, Jerusalem, Alem, converts to Salem, which is basically the story of witches. Witches and bitches, because the female of a dog priest is called a bitch. And this is what this story is all about. You have basically three organizations that have been set up in order to strip you of everything you have. The front organization is where you get your job, your transnational corporation. By transferring all of the value onto an international stock market, it allows people from outside your country to come in and scoop up everything that's on the stock market and bring it back. And of course, before the scooping is done, then crisis must be brought about in order to cause the value of the stock market to drop generally, and nothing is better than a banking crisis. During Reagan's years, they basically stripped the savings and loans, and now, during George Bush's period, they're basically stripping the value of the stock market. One more cataclysmic event in the United States, and the value of the shares in the United States will drop to almost nothing. And it's being prepared for you. you're living in a time called the Age of Aquarius. You've lived through the passage. That's why the word pass was included in this year's Rose Bowl parade. The passport to world's festivals. Estival, the Eastern Valleys, is basically what it means. Pass the door, passport. Port is a door in French. You pass the port. You enter the pass age period, the age of pass. Since 1998-99, you've seen the economy of the United States being totally undermined by technology transfer outside the country. Which means when you go, the technology you developed in the United States will continue to operate because the property will be somewhere else. How many people on the stock market front for other people, who front for other people, who front for other people, and the transfer of property, real property, is on its way out. The value of your homes is being diminished by the banking crisis that we're living today. How the middle class is finding it difficult to get going rates on their labor, because the system through Mexico, a basically Arabian country for 700 years prior to 1492, is basically promoting the message of the Basques and the Kurds. And Mexicans from Mexico and other Spaniards from South America are moving into the United States to take those jobs. These people are not in on the plan. They don't know anything about the plan. They're just looking for a little security for themselves. But the governments of both countries have written rules that allows this to happen. Free trade rules, immigration rules, not enforcing laws. Corporations want the cheaper labor. Governments who control taxation want to turn a blind eye to what's happening. They pass the problem over to the individual states and then deny them the right to enforce the laws. Let me give you a what if. Over the last 8-10 years or so, we've seen cataclysmic events occur. We've seen 9/11. We've seen earthquakes in Pakistan. We've seen volcanoes. We've seen hurricane destruction of New Orleans and currently in Burma, and earthquakes happening in China. All of this activity is happening in that ring around the world that is the empty quarter, which is it's known as within insider circles, the empty quarter. That space of 45 degrees from the 8th parallel, Costa Rica, to the 53rd parallel, James Bay in the north, with the exception of a part of Ontario, which is known as the visor on the cap. Because if you think about the circular cap worn by the Pope and by rabbis, the 45 degrees remaining in the northern hemisphere will include the space from the 53rd degree to the 90th degree, which is above us, and the 8 degrees from Costa Rica down to the equator below us, and of course the rest of the southern hemisphere is scheduled to stay on for 1,000 more years. So if you read mythology, the mythology of India, the mythology of Japan, the mythology of Persia, the mythology of Egypt, the mythology of Rome, and the Scandinavian mythology, you will find that the plan for what is about to occur is written as stories in the mythology. The plan is always identified by a capital letter E, which has 3 and 1 holding it all together. So you have the corporations, and you have the government, and in the middle you have the media, and over on the side you have religion, which holds it all together, the capital letter E. And if you notice these days, the capital letter E is being shown on an angle. Something is about to knock it over on its side. Global warming is what they call it. But the plan to destroy this area of the northern hemisphere has been in place for thousands of years. The Norse mythology of Scandinavia and country in Germany, Holland, Belgium, call this Ragnarok, Agna rock, Magna rock, Blackwater. And everything I have deciphered leads me to believe that this is what is about to happen. 3 events. Anytime now, from the year 2008, as we entered the age of Aquarius, water contained in containers is the symbolism. And the next coming of Halley's Comet, 2062. It comes every 75 years, which is to give you a hint about the number they're talking about in reverse and upside down is the omega number, and it's 75 if looked at in one direction, and turn it around, it looks like 57. 57 is known as the Ketchup number, Heinz 57 varieties. So it has to do with something that is a stew, a mess, the Bible calls it a mess of potage. Mess of potage is fish stew. Recently we've heard Blackwater as the murderers in Iraq, protectors of something, murderers of others. The mining industry is involved, and particularly the coal mining, and you've heard of all the problems with coal mining regularly over the last few years. You've heard about how a bridge in Minnesota at one end lifted up, moved sideways, and dropped down again, and the whole bridge collapsed. That's because something is going on underneath. And the something going on underneath can only be explained if you follow a lot of the activity in the coal mining industry. Here in Cape Breton in Canada, on the east coast, for example, there's a hydro plant in Sydney, and it sits on top of a coal mine. And the owners closed down, the owners who were the government, closed down the coal mine and started importing coal to operate the electrical hydro plant from South America. Now, why would anybody stop mining perfectly good coal at home and fetch the coal from South America and refuse, if they were using the excuse that it wasn't a profitable mine, they refused the offers from the employees to buy the mine and run it themselves, preferring instead to transport coal from South America. I put it to you that the coal is needed where it is, as it is needed from the Ohio Valley, across Indiana, across Illinois, across Michigan, and that Michigan is in mortal danger. Michigan, as you know, has a peninsula leading into the Great Lakes, another peninsula coming down from further north into the Great Lakes. That used to be an area called the Great Sea at the time of the melting of the glaciers. Agassiz, Great Sea. ZZ, top, is part of the code. And this Great Sea needs to be reconstructed again. So you've had mining off of Ile Royale for copper in the Lake Michigan there. You've had salt mines emptied out under Detroit. You have iron mines at Duluth, Minnesota. All of that leaves spaces underground that once something cataclysmic occurs, everything will collapse. And what you will have happen is basically an induced nova. If you look at a celestial body that is solid, and you create a nova, it's called a supernova. It gets overheated, and it blows to smithereens. But if you have, like Earth, a planet that has water on the surface and plates that float, you don't get the supernova, you get simply the nova. The nova basically means that everything starts churning, it falls into holes, it mixes in with the water, and it only lasts for a limited period of time, but everything in its path of this nova is destroyed. Mountains can topple. Lakes mix in. It's coal seams across America, from Lake Superior all across the north and then down into Salt Lake City, Utah, and below, all the way to Yuma. Anyone in his right mind would know that a particle accelerator has the initials Pa, father, Ma and Pa's kettle, and that a particle accelerator, which replicates what the sun is doing when it's burning up, is used to collide in a collier of coal will intensify the burning, move it on quicker, and cause the burning coal seam to turn to ashes. And the ashes will collapse, bringing with it all of the land above it and all of the water that is today the Great Lakes, the big lakes in Manitoba, the artificial movement of water from the reservoirs in Saskatchewan. The whole area across the United States, above Costa Rica and Central America, all the way up to the 53rd parallel, which is basically 2 degrees parallel below the Alaskan Panhandle on the BC border. The collapse of the United States in this fashion, along with the destruction of the oceanfront property in the east on the Atlantic, on the west in the Pacific, and the combination of the eastern side sending tsunamis up into the Gulf of Mexico will destroy populations on the coast. An international space station run by so-called tourists who've been up to take their training and see how things are over the last few years on Russian spacecraft, $20 million apiece, sent back to man the International Space Station, controlling the Hubble telescope, reversing it and using it as an amplifier of light, can be focused on a celestial body, whether it be a comet or the moon or what have you, and create a supernova, causing rocks to fall from the sky. To try to imagine what the United States would look like, and when I say the United States, I don't limit it to the United States. It's the entire developed area of the Northern Hemisphere, starting at one end with Japan, China, coming in to all of the countries in the middle, including India, all in turn, Egypt, Europe, all of Europe, with the exception of everything above the 53rd parallel. England, southern Canada, the United States, Mexico, Nicaragua, many of the Central American countries above Costa Rica. All of that is scheduled to be destroyed. As things are moved from one place to the other, they enhance the possibility that the areas that have been repossessed behind would be the first to go. And the period in time is now. 2008, bottom line, 2062, top line. 3 events. Rocks from the sky, a nova creating fire and brimstone from below, and floods enhanced by the Titanic fitted for this purpose, sitting and waiting at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean at the mid-Atlantic ridge, sitting and waiting for its message to enhance the force that will be brought about by nature. Minimum amount of people killed, 100 million. In the United States alone. 2 billion people in the world. And once it's all over, Ragnarok says that a number of people will be brought to Valhalla. Valhalla is exactly where I'm sitting right now, in the spur, which is the boot of Ontario. But it's also the visor on the cap that will remain in the north, because this is the Canadian shield. And it says in the mythology that the place will be protected by shields. The Valkyries are to gather up the DNA of the dead and bring them to this area so that they can be ready to repopulate the cap, which is above Ontario, James Bay, and the rest of the north on top of the planet, the North Pole, and everything in Scandinavia and Siberia, Alaska, and Canada. All of that is to remain. They're not talking about a unification of Mexico, the U.S., and Canada when they're talking, when the leaders are meeting to talk about continental merger. They're talking about the new continent that will exist above us. Valhalla here is to be divided into 3 parts. One part east of Highway 31 going towards the Ontario-Quebec border is scheduled to be the place where the soldiers are taken. This side of Highway 416 is scheduled to be where the women will come, where our farm is. Those are the Valkyries talked about in Norse mythology. Valkyries are the women that go and fetch the souls of the dead soldiers on the women's side and bring them back here. And the middle part is supposed to be Valhalla. And in Valhalla is the largest structure ever built on Earth. It's a building that will be about 50 miles long and 20 miles across. And it's where they're going to have their conference center and everything. The city of Ottawa is just around the corner from Valhalla. And although it is the government of Canada and was sufficiently large to handle that duty, it recently has brought in so much farmland from the surrounding area that it is now the largest rural, rather than urban, rural-based capital in the entire world. Obviously, it means that someone in the U.S. already knows, and they'll be rushing in this direction. And that's exactly what the Norse mythology is all about. It talks about the people rushing across the Rainbow Bridge. That's the name of the bridge at Niagara Falls, and the bridge collapsing behind them as they run. So there'll be a cadre of people sent to this region to establish the new government of North America, which will in fact be a cap on the planet. And why the mafia, the mob, was called Al Capone, Cap 1. Capstone, ST, in the numerology of the code is 1-2, or 2 in 1. Male, female, reverse the gender process genetically and create a single gender, marsupial in appearance. In other words, it's a person that will be able to give birth and raise the baby without the assistance of a partner. That's because that's the most economical way of sending someone into space. Rather than having a group of people going off to set up, as they did with the Mayflower, and all the entailing problems, with all of the available choices that exist out in the universe, they want to send hundreds of thousands of spacecrafts with one occupant. And if that person is lucky enough to find a rock, which can be terraformed, that person will have traveled so far that it becomes impossible for the person to return to Earth. What will happen basically is communications will then send a reinforcing group from Earth. And that reinforcing group will set up a mining operation or anything that can bring revenue back to the deans of dollars, who are the terrestrials of this universe, the hijackers of creation. And it's all about power. The word owl, the word lower, the word power, the word flower, all refer to genetic engineering down below. During the past thousands of years, priests have collected from the sacrifices they caused young people to make by giving up their life, chopping off their heads, taking out their uterus, removing the eggs from all the young virgins, discarding as burnt offerings anything they didn't find of any value, and taking the eggs and putting them in storage for what they are going to need at a later date. We are being styled peas in a pod by the advertising media and by podcasts that come out of an iPod. And the pea in the pod is significant because everything this plan has in mind refers to the word green. And in their language, it means here. Ici. Ici is French for here. Medici. And green. It's the green revolution that the politicians want you to adopt. You're willing their will when you say you want change and are not more specific about what change it is you're looking for. They have change in mind for you, but it has nothing to do with the change you're expecting. What it has to do with is your destruction. There is a place on this planet called Greenland. It's not green. So why do they call it Greenland? when right next door there's a place that becomes green and it's called Iceland. Greenland is a bowl. It has the word owl in it. It's a bowl of stone 2 miles deep. It's filled with ice. It is the most appropriate place, starting in 5000 BC, for priests to come up across the Shetland Islands from Scotland and to Iceland and Greenland to create the storage place for the eggs they took from virgins for thousands and thousands of years. I can see it in my mind, going to a beehive, removing the wax, giving away the honey, because that's instant gratification. What they're looking for is infrastructure. They're called honey guides. And taking this wax and in each slot putting in an egg. Billions of eggs stored in Greenland are awaiting the day when they can be opened up and their existing DNA messages bottled so that people can be reconstituted. Mitochondrial DNA will be reconstituted. Now, to fool you along the way, they have made at least 50 leaders in this country, in this world, I should say, and 13,000 other people at a high ranking as samples of these new slaves that we will have in the future. You got to remember, this is a war on women. And what they have managed to do is to fool you by genetically engineering men, not as clones of the men they used to be, but by interrupting the development after the first few weeks, when the brain is set, when the skull is set, when the lungs are set, stopping the development like a spontaneous abortion occurs out of the tube. Your tube on TV is kind of a laughing at you, at YouTube. You're a tube for this system that they're about to put in place. But by interrupting the development of the fetus that would normally make its way to be a clone of the male that was used to manufacture it, they are able to put it in an incubator and bombard it with radiation, bombard it with chemotherapy, and change the gender of the outside appearance of this man to female. The official name for the finished product is pseudo-hermaphrodite, a phony hermaphrodite. And that pseudo-hermaphrodite looks, for all intents and purposes, as a woman, and on the outside acts like a woman, and has the ovaries of a woman. But on top of that, inside the body, there's a testy. And therefore, that woman, that hermaphrodite woman, can in fact pollinate, fertilize her own egg, his own egg. Many of these women are being placed in positions of power around the world. Started with Golda Meir, went on to Margaret Thatcher. I don't have to tell you how many women seem to be ruling countries around the world these days, or given positions of power. Are these women really women? Not according to the code I'm reading. So unless 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 clues that I've deciphered over the last 10 years using these codes, the dictionaries, the Bibles, the encyclopedia, William Shakespeare, the programming done in major magazines, the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, CBC, BBC, CTV in Canada. All of these things have programs or imagery that suggest they're involved in the plan. Does it mean everybody in CNN knows what's going on? No, but someone does. In a newspaper, it has to be the editor. The word editor, edit, says it in French. E-Z, D-I-T means says. So E says is the word editor. Does everybody in a university know they're teaching false history or incomplete history? They try not to lie outright. They try to lie by omission as much as possible. But when you go to court, they know what they do, so they make you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And yet, as I did on a number of occasions, if I tried to tell the whole truth in court, they don't want to hear. As long as it's favorable to them, they want to hear it. So therefore, the judges who start with the letter J, as in Jerusalem, Beijing, that added the letters I and J in the middle of the word being. You know, when they lived in Africa, they were known as the Bing. And then they were engineered to become the being. And then the being from Beijing. And now that they're on automatic pilot, they're called the Boeing. Always a play with the same letters. I can't explain the code in detail. It would take too long to do. Let me just say to you now that I happen to live on a farm. I believe this farm to be Gimli, a part of what will be the new complex on the visor of the Cap continent above us. I want you to come here. I want you to spend some time with us. It's nothing fancy. It's best if you can afford your own hotel or come in a recreation vehicle and park at the door. It's a prefab 1976 house occupied by two old men who have no money. So don't expect to come here and be treated like royalty. You will be treated instead like friends should treat other friends or neighbors. I will not stand by and allow the Canadian government to participate in a plot to destroy our American neighbors or our neighbors around the world for that matter. But I may not be able to stop it on my own. And I need assistance. As an appendix to this video, I plan to walk around the farm a little bit and videotape so that those people who are interested in seeing this can come and have a look at it for themselves and ask all the questions you want. All we want is your assistance. I believe they have 13,000 people out there in the world, plus 50 leaders manufactured to cause the world harm. I think the critical mass necessary for stopping them in their tracks is 13 people. I've been looking for those 13 people, and they identify themselves. I don't identify them. For the last 20 years. I can only vouch for a half a dozen or so people. Anywhere between 5 and 8 people. And I even might be wrong for all that matters. But I think the critical mass that's required, a number that appears in physics as total protection, is 13. But whether or not you are part of that 13, you can help us with goods and services. This camera is a donation of our friends in California. Without this camera, I wouldn't be able to speak with you today. My name is Glen Kealey, and I live in Oxford Mills, Ontario, Canada. The address is 908 County Road 18, Oxford Mills, Ontario. J8X 1SO. JOX 1SO. I'd have to hold on that postal code. I don't write to myself very often. I'll have to look at it again someplace. See if I can track it down. Sorry, there it is. KOG 1SO is the postal code. Send us a check. Send money through one of the money transfer services. Call me. Area code 613-258-2893. Let's talk, at least. Let's see what together we can do. With each addition of a supporter, we do a little more. We can't do it alone. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen. And I suggest that you get a copy of this disc and play it in the privacy of your bedroom, a few minutes at a time each evening, so you can ponder upon what you've heard. Thank you. The appendix video will follow.